it is my true honor to get to welcome our keynote speaker tonight, Mr. Elan Carr. Mr. Elan Carr is the Special Envoy to combat and monitor anti-Semitism, and thank you, sir, for being here this evening.
Well, thank you, Micah, and thank you all. My goodness, what an evening of inspiration this is. Benjamin, Rosita, OSS, you've outdone yourselves. That's saying a lot, because you never fail to put together programs that move and touch and prompt us to think and prompt us to take action, most importantly. And with that, I have to begin by saying, Laila Latif, what an inspiration you are. Thank you so much. You know, you give us hope. And I want to thank you for your words tonight and for everything you do to make our world a better place. We're lucky to have you. To our co-sponsors, ZOA and Camera, organizations near and dear to my heart. It's great to see my friends from both of them, of course. General Epstein, thank you. So I want to thank my brothers in arms from Israel and the United Kingdom. And then, of course, I have to save my double brothers in arms. I'm an Army officer, and I was very proud to have worn that uniform. In fact, I'm supposed to be drilling this weekend, actually. And I want to thank you for your service, and it warms my heart to see you here. In fact, my two favorite audiences, students, young people, and soldiers, and we have them both here tonight. So I'm thrilled. Thank you for your service. To our students from multiple high schools, thank you for being here, and thank you for embracing your opportunity to lead at a time when our world so desperately craves leadership. My friends, 10 months ago, I was appointed by President Trump and Secretary Pompeo to lead America's fight against this ancient, recurring, indefatigable human sickness that is anti-Semitism. I take this position at a time of staggering growth in anti-Semitism throughout the world. Jews are being attacked on the streets. The internet is boiling over with anti-Semitic venom. The UN, well, is the UN. Synagogues are vandalized, not only in Europe, but in Brooklyn, in Los Angeles, and the campuses too often are places of disgraceful anti-Semitism. 1 month ago, on October 27th, I arrived in Halle, Germany, to visit the site of the Yom Kippur synagogue attack. And I chose that date not accidentally. October 27th, the day of my arrival there, was the 1-year anniversary of the murders at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. And it was the 6-month anniversary to the day of the murder of Lori Kay, who was killed at Chabad of Poway, at whose funeral, by the way, I spoke. And I chose that date to arrive in Halle to make the point that the rise in anti-Semitism we're seeing today is not a German problem or even a European problem. It is a global problem that requires nothing other than a focused, determined global solution. And so what is going on? Where is this coming from? How is it the case that 75 years since the end of the extermination of the Jewish people in Europe, we're seeing this happen? Hitler was reported to have said notoriously in his last days that in a matter of 100 or 200 years, this will all be forgotten and they'll be back to killing Jews. Are we really going to prove that Hitler overestimated the bloodlust of this indefatigable hatred? The sources of this rise in anti-Semitism are three: the extreme right, the radical left, and militant Islam. I want you to think about that for a moment. The ethnic supremacist right, the radical left, and militant Islam, these are three groups, three ideological camps that should hate each other more than they hate anything else on earth. And yet they're united by their hatred of the Jewish people. And united also, I would argue, no less importantly, by the fundamental incompatibility of their values with everything on which the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and so many other countries in the world have been built. And so this is truly the fight of our age. The anti-Semitism of the ethnic supremacist right. This is the anti-Semitism of far-right political movements in parts of Europe, of torchlit marches in the streets, marches that wave red banners with sharp black objects on them, reminiscent of days from which we thought we had long graduated. This is the anti-Semitism of the far right in so many countries. This is also the anti-Semitism of vile, venal chat rooms in the dark web that express hatred, really of everybody, unlike them, but most of all for the Jews. The anti-Semitism of militant Islam is, of course, not new to us. It results from indoctrination beginning in schools throughout the Middle East of children. Indoctrination of children, by the way, putting aside of what that means for the Jewish people. That's nothing other than mass child abuse. To teach children, innocent children, to hate others is despicable. But what it produces is a population indoctrinated in Jew hatred. The chief source of violence against Jews in Western Europe today, and as you point out in the United Kingdom, is a radicalized militant Islamic population. Now that, of course, is not all Muslims and not all Arabs, but those who have been radicalized are the chief source of violence. I want to spend a few moments talking about the third source, and that's the anti-Semitism of the radical left. And the reason why I want to speak a little bit at greater length about that is because while everybody is clear what neo-Nazis are, nobody is confused what that represents. But when it comes to the so-called new anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that dresses itself in the fig leaf of anti-Zionism and Israel hatred, well, suddenly there's hand-wringing. Suddenly there's confusion. I just returned from Europe, and sometimes with my counterparts, I would raise the issue, and I'd get, well, it's complicated. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not complicated. Very, very simple. It's good old-fashioned Jew hatred is what it is. Except instead of aimed at the Jew down the street or the Jew in the community, it's aimed at the Jew among the countries. In fact, there's nothing new about the new anti-Semitism. Every single manifestation of classic anti-Semitism is duplicated precisely in the so-called new anti-Semitism. Blood libels. Blood libels then, blood libels now, as Israel is accused of genocide, of being an apartheid state, even, as I have heard and even read in print, infecting Palestinian children with viruses. Blood libels then, blood libels now. The same rhetoric. Famous philosopher in France, Elan was recently called a dirty Zionist, as though the substitution of a word might confuse us as to what is actually meant. Same rhetoric then, same rhetoric now. The same isolation, the Jew in the community is the outsider, not legitimate, threatening to undermine our ethnic purity or our religious values. Well, similar isolation. The Jew among the countries, its legitimacy questioned, its right to exist questioned. It's being called a racist endeavor. Same isolation. Same economic boycotts. Economic boycotts aren't new. We've all seen the signs of the brown shirts in front of shops, Kauf nicht bei Juden. Well, what's BDS, if not that? Don't buy from the Jew, thereby denying the one Jewish state economic intercourse and attempting to do through economic means what no army in the world could have done. Also the same is the obsessive, pathological, insane focus on its target. Anti-Semitism has always been like that. Let me tell you a story. A kid at a top university in the United States gave me the answer sheet to his math class. I still have a copy. It says, you know, the derivative of so-and-so is such and such, the integral of such and such, so-and-so. And then it says, another day in the occupied Palestinian territory, Zionist forces murdering children. And then it goes back to math. The kid who gave this to me in a voice reflecting utter exhaustion, said, "In math class, I can't even escape this? Even in math class?" That's right, even in math class. Because like the anti-Semitism of the ages, this so-called new anti-Semitism is just as insane, just as maniacal, just as focused on its target. And finally, a critical similarity is the blaming of the Jew for the anti-Semitic response. It's as old as anti-Semitism itself. Do you know that even Kristallnacht was blamed on something a Jew did, and no blood and matzah this time, something real. It was blamed as a response to the assassination of a German diplomat by a Jewish kid, Herschel Greenspan. But just because the Nazis claim that that's why Kristallnacht happened doesn't mean we're so naive as to believe it. We understand with total moral clarity that Kristallnacht was part of the strategy of Nazi Germany to eradicate the Jewish people. We're not confused about it. But when it comes to the new anti-Semitism, that similarly always blames the anti-Semitic response on something Israel does, there's confusion. What does Israel do? Well, could be anything. Could be something fictional. Could be something real, by the way. A military operation here, a building project there, something Prime Minister Netanyahu said, something Prime Minister Netanyahu didn't say. But we should be morally clear and entirely unconfused that although the anti-Semitic orgies that we see against the state of Israel are blamed on something Israel does, it has nothing to do with anything Israel does. It has everything to do with what Israel is. And so there's nothing new about the new anti-Semitism. And in order to fight anti-Semitism, we have to fight it in all its forms. When you leave 2/3 of a tumor untreated, or even 1/3 of the tumor untreated, the patient doesn't have a good chance. And so it's all or nothing. We've got to fight all of it. I don't distinguish between the anti-Semitism of the right, of the left, or of Islam. Jew hatred is Jew hatred, and we've got to confront it. Lest anyone think that the anti-Semitism of the campus, which is typically the anti-Semitism of the left, is something that's relegated to that other world, the student world, not our world, but that campus world. Let me tell you what's going on. A recent survey done of Jewish university students in the United States shows that Jewish students are less supportive of Israel today than ever before, more inclined to identify with Israel's enemies than ever before. And in every Christian evangelical conference, the topic of discussion is we're losing our young people. We're losing our young people on Israel. A British Labour MP, with whom I just had the pleasure of appearing on a panel, said to me in a meeting that has to count as the most hair-raising that I've had in the last 10 months, and that's saying a lot. This British MP who walked out of the Labour Party said to me, this disaster we have in England all started on the campuses. We did nothing because they were only students. And then it moved into the Labour Party. We did nothing because it was just a fringe. Today they won and we lost, and I no longer have a political party. I want you to know my hair stood on end. Now there's a lot of bad news out there, but I would be remiss not to end my remarks with some good news, because there's also good news. Because of this rise in anti-Semitism, a lot of good people in the world are genuinely appalled and determined to fight this with everything they've got. And we're seeing real results. Let me just give you a few examples. In the EU, thanks to anti-Semitism coordinator for Europe, Katharina von Schnurbein, there's an agreement between the EU and internet companies where anti-Semitic postings are taken down in 24 hours. In Ukraine, a country where the collaboration with Nazi Germany was so profound that their own police were basically Einsatzgruppen. In Ukraine, not only was a Jewish president of the country elected, But during the campaign where he ran against the incumbent sitting president, his Jewishness never came up. Not once did it come up in that election. In Germany, there's not only a federal anti-Semitism coordinator, but they have federalized the fight against anti-Semitism. 16 separate German states each have anti-Semitism coordinators that fight anti-Semitism on the ground where the rubber meets the road, education and law enforcement. I just attended law enforcement conferences, bringing together law enforcement officials of 7 German states that came together to discuss fighting hate crimes. And then there's the German Bundestag that voted. The German Bundestag voted that BDS, the global movement to boycott Israel, is anti-Semitism. So says the German Bundestag. In fact, they voted that it is reminiscent of the Juden boycotts of the 1930s. In France, at every single police academy in the country and at every single prosecutor and judges academy in the country, cadets are trained on hate crimes and on anti-Semitism. And just yesterday, actually just today, the French Parliament, the National Assembly, voted by a margin of 2/3. 2/3, by the way, Senator Everett Dirksen once said 2/3. You can't get 2/3 for a Mother's Day resolution. The French Parliament just voted by a 2/3 majority that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So says the French National Assembly. In the United Kingdom, anti-Semitism has become a central key issue. And finally, the UN, where it's hard to find good news. In the UN, Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid published a report so astounding and so fair on anti-Semitism. As I read it, I had to flip back to the first page to make sure I was reading the right document. It's a model. But then finally, 2 last pieces of good news, and that brings us back to OSS. 2 last pieces of good news in our global fight. One is the United States of America. The most philo-Semitic country in history is now led by an administration focused in unprecedented extent on the fight against anti-Semitism. President Trump calls anti-Semitism a vile poison, and in every action this administration has taken, most recently to correct the injustice of calling Jewish communities in the disputed territories war crimes. This administration corrects injustice after injustice, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, recognizing Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, closing the PLO office in Washington, defunding UNRWA, defunding the pay-to-slay program, removing occupied territories from the State Department human rights reports, and the list goes on and on. And then finally, the last piece of good news is the existence of the State of Israel and its remarkable armed forces, the IDF. I attended the first official American delegation to March of the Living, and as I went through Auschwitz-Birkenau, that place of death and hell, I saw something that I will never forget. I saw maybe 2 or 3 squads of IDF soldiers in uniform. And everybody who saw this could not help but have tears well up in our eyes as we saw these young soldiers representing Jewish self-determination and the capacity of the Jewish people to defend itself in that place. We all understood how history would have been different had that uniform been around 76 and 77 and 78 years ago. And so the State of Israel is the last piece of good news. And just as those brave men and women of the IDF who protect not only the State of Israel, but the people of Israel, the Jewish people, who fight bayam ba'avir bayabasha, as the prayer goes, just as those young people fight for the Jewish people, so too does OSS fight for them, for their good name, for the moral decency of that army, for the concept of purity of arms and adherence to international law. And when anti-Semites seek to hang new blood libels on the State of Israel, OSS is always there to tell the truth and to stand for justice and to fight for those who fight for justice. And so I want to thank you for your wonderful work, Benjamin, and all of your great leaders, professional and lay. And I want to wish you all the very best, Chazak u'Baruch, as you work to make our world a better place. Thank you so much.